If you want to support our podcast financially, please visit patreon.com/IIMBSB. Also, email us with questions or ideas at ifimaypodcast@gmail.com. At the ripe old age of 21, Joshua Harris wrote his best-selling book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. It sold over 1.2 million copies.
While chatting at a birthday party not long ago, my friend Hannah and I realized we had both read the book as teens and bonded over how intensely it shaped our attitudes towards sex and romance growing up.
So today we welcome our friend Hannah Smith, whom you may know from the hit true crime podcast, The Opportunist, as we dive into the content of the book, the impressions it left on Justin and Hannah as teens, and Josh Harris's renunciation of the book and pivot away from Christianity. We talked to Hannah for quite a while, so today will be part 1 of the interview, and you'll hear the rest next week.
Welcome to If I May Be So Bold, a podcast about relationships.
The ones we have with others, the one we have with ourselves.
And given that Dan and I are a couple, you're going to be hearing about our relationship too.
I'm Dan Epstein, a recording artist, former opera singer, and relational coach.
I'm Justin Waring Crane, a therapist, recovering perfectionist, and karaoke star.
So we've been off for a while.
We're back.
Stuff's happened.
Oh my God.
We got COVID.
We got COVID finally. I was like in between accents there, but
yeah, we're doing a lot of like, I thought I might never get it.
Yeah.
Like I escaped COVID for 3 years, but it got us.
I thought I was better than everyone else. All you suckers getting sick. But no, so we did finally get COVID. It's true. It was horrible. I got both my parents sick with COVID as well. They're fine. I was getting COVID like on moving day, moving in with Dan. So I felt super crazy in my body. And then watched too much Game of Thrones.
Well, then we both kind of got depressed.
Yeah, then we got depressed because, well, I think it was partly because I watched too much Game of Thrones. And I became...
You're just so determined to get this Game of Thrones.
I became so depressed.
You were like...
stopped watching beginning of season 4. Ugh. And yeah, I just got really depressed because of, the fatigue was so bad. I hear everyone talk about the fatigue, but I was like, No, it was really, I feel bad that I didn't, validate those people enough or something, because I had never experienced fatigue like that personally. I could not wake up in the morning. It was wretched.
Yeah. But here we are. We're living together.
I think it's going to be really fun. I know, because it has been, it's just, there's so much buildup, and I've never lived with a boyfriend. So there's a lot of buildup and a lot of sort of, I think, pressure I was placing on myself, like to be happy right away.
Yeah.
And being like, this is like a happy time. This should be a happy time. Yeah. And we should be like celebrating, but like, we weren't feeling that way, because it was just like all like just being in the space of the house with all my boxes and not being able to organize anything because I was feeling too lousy was just kind of a nightmare for me.
Right. Also, there was the element where you had been feeling really happy for quite a while.
I know. I soared
through the summer.
I soared all summer. I was soaring for 3 full months, maybe even 4 months.
But you kept worrying about when it was the energy of that was going to.
I was like, it can't last because I was like freaked out by how happy I was.
Yeah. And then when you did get depressed, I think we were both kind of bracing for whether that was going to be like a longer, like extended depression. And I also I wasn't depressed at first, but then I got really depressed for a couple of days. I think it was one of those things where, you know how like, sometimes even when something good happens, a lot of grief can come up. I think I was experiencing that in part along with the fatigue.
So something good being me moving in.
Yeah. And just that being like a major change. I was feeling that in my body. And it was hard because I felt like it was hard for me to connect with you because I was just going through that. That felt like something I needed to kind of sit with for myself. Yeah.
Yeah. But don't worry, everyone. We're feeling more connected now. No, we had a housewarming party towards the end of October. It's almost, November. So, and that party was like kind of like a turning point, I think, because sort of came out of all the crap that was October and had like some really healing dance moments. We had like a dance party. And that felt pretty blissful.
Yeah, it felt great.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to this interview in a bit, but we needed a break to kind of regroup because it was a lot going on. I had a show that I played and Justin moving in. But we're feeling really good about expanding ourselves in this podcast. I don't know if expanding ourselves is right at all, but just like having the break, allowing us to think about what we want the podcast to be going forward and what type of people, what type of voices we want to have on here. And yeah, I'm excited for what's to come. We talked about that you guys could just give context for like how this book landed in your hands.
Yeah.
Like what was going on, what was set the scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Hannah, you were living in Oklahoma, I presume.
Yeah. Oh, have we started?
Yeah.
Is this where we're going?
Should we start?
Unless we want to like.
Do we need to like lube ourselves up a little bit?
What did you say?
Do we need to just like check in? How's everybody feeling?
Yeah, I think that could be nice.
Okay.
How are you feeling, Justin?
Oh my gosh. The echo is back.
Oh no.
And you didn't touch anything?
Yes, I did. Sorry, that's my fault. Okay.
Did you fix it?
Yeah, I fixed it. I'm sorry. Okay.
Nice knowing that echo could come back at any second though, frankly.
Keeps me honest.
Yeah. So we're going to discuss I Kissed Dating Goodbye or How I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
So the official title of the book is I Kissed Dating Goodbye, A New Attitude Toward Romance and Relationships.
Mm-hmm. So I never read this book. I wasn't also not raised Christian in any way. So I want to know, I feel like I'm going to kind of just want to be like the outsider in this conversation, but I want to know, like for both of you, I want to know the context for this book coming into your life and, what that process was of delving in.
Should I go first? Okay. So I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I think I was probably like an early teen, maybe like 14 or something. And so I grew up very Christian evangelical in Oklahoma. and it was pretty insular. I ended up going to a public high school, but before that I'd gone to all Christian schools, very small. 99% of my community and interactions were with people that believed exactly the same thing as me. Mostly, I did have like one secular neighbor who introduced me to things like the Spice Girls and like a few things that I got exposure.
I mean, one secular neighbor sounds like something. It sounds like a show. It sounds like a movie. I don't know.
Yeah. One secular neighbor.
Wait, can we get context for the neighbor? Like, was that like, was that a big deal that this person was secular?
Yeah. I mean, so she was like she was my only friend really who wasn't Christian. And she grew up across the street from me and we became really good friends. And we were close, but I was like very aware that she and her family weren't Christians. But then as I got older, it was sort of like a fun like escape. Whereas like I both wanted to be a really good Christian because I took my spirituality very seriously. But then like I was also becoming a teenager. And so I would go over to her house and we would listen to like whatever was on the radio at that time, which I wasn't allowed to listen to. We would watch, she had cable. I would watch like Full House, like very benign things that I wasn't allowed to do. Listen to the Spice Girls. So it was like sort of this peek into the world, which was meaningful to me.
That is so... When you were talking about that, I had this flash memory of, we would go over to people's houses when I was growing up who they were members of the church that we were in. But this one family, for whatever reason, I think they were just more like more loose or like more like relaxed with music, especially, and maybe just in general. But I remember this one night that I was like, okay, all the kids would like hang out in the basement because that was like where like, they had like the rec room and it was like fun. That's where we could like listen to music. All the parents were upstairs, like doing Bible study or whatever. And we went downstairs and this girl's name was Rachel, I think. And she had like, she had like brown hair, like really thick brown hair. And she wore those like, those headbands that were like the zigzag, like headbands.
Yes.
you
so
like,
cool.
They're like in a circle, like small, but then you like put them on your hair and you like flip your hair over and they like expand, and just like hold your hair in this like formation. Anyway, it was like around the time that Oops, I Did It Again came out.
Yes.
I had never heard that music before.
Wow.
I was probably like 9 or 10 years old. I don't remember. And she was dancing like the way that Britney would dance. And I was like gasping, like, I couldn't even believe how she was dancing. And I was like trying to like copy that. Oh. And it was like, I think my sexual awakening was like that night, Yeah.
It's so powerful when you're not exposed to those things and you're like learning about the world. I mean, as a kid anyway, as a young person for the first time, but then I don't know, that's such a powerful moment. And I love that it happens in a basement of like where the parents are upstairs. Like that's just so perfect.
Yeah.
Hannah, just to check, you are recording on your phone, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's amazing. All you got from this, Dan?
No, I understand this.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, are you recording on your phone?
Yeah. You wait until I'm like crying and you're like, just to check in, are you recording?
What iOS are you using? Just kidding.
No, I don't know. I don't know, I identified with that so much. My friend, my secular neighbor, Emma, is wonderful. We kind of lost touch, but she's great. And I remember there was one time, because I also, tying back into like this book later, had to dress very like conservatively and modestly had to wear like loose clothes, covering up everything because of the idea that like that you have to not that your body could be like a dangerous thing to make someone else lust after you, particularly men. And so like I would always wear, you know, like one of my friends wasn't even allowed to wear like tank tops. And I could, but not like a spaghetti strap, you know? So I would go over to Emma's house and then like I would try on her clothes just to like see what my body looked like in a tight tank top, you know? And then of course I knew I wouldn't be able to like wear that out into the world, but it was like this little moment that I could have that.
Yeah, it's like your window into like if I ever were able to wear this, like this is what it would look like, you know, and that's just like your like secret little world.
Yeah. So, but then I guess saying goodbye to get, I guess, yeah. So when I was an early teenager, this book started to be everywhere. I mean, I looked it up actually before this, and it sold 1.2 million copies. And if you weren't like tapped into the Christian, contemporary Christian like music or media at all, books, you might not have heard of it, but it was, if you were at all tapped into that at the time, you definitely heard about this book. And the whole concept is that you, the writer Joshua Harris is suggesting that dating is basically a sin, that like, and that the new way of dating would be getting to know someone with the idea that you might marry them. And so if you're not going to marry someone, you shouldn't even date them. You should, you know, and it goes way deeper into that. But I think how it, you know, at the time in my life, it was like I was definitely starting to think about, do I want to date people? Do I have a crush on someone at youth group? Definitely lots of crushes at youth group. But, you know, I also was like, well, I'm not ready to get married. So
meanwhile, you're how old at this point? Like early
like
teens.
15, like
15,
14, 16 maybe ish.
Yeah.
When I read it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, what am I supposed to do? I'm not ready to get married at 15. Like,
was this the type of book though, where like your parents knew you were reading it? Like it was like, or was it like through your peers that you came into this book, you know?
I think I came into it through my peers.
Yeah.
I don't know if my parents knew I was reading it, but I think they would have been supportive of it because they were definitely, it wasn't like I wasn't allowed to date, but I sort of wasn't allowed to date. Like,
okay.
It would have had to be like, this is very serious and maybe moving toward like a serious thing, like marriage-ish.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I come from like Jewish ancestry, but my mom had the same exact thing where her dad like wouldn't let her go to dances with people who weren't Jewish. So it wasn't like she couldn't date at all, but there was still like some of this.
And was that at all when you were growing up? Was there pressure to only date Jewish people?
No, there was just like championing of Jewishness. There was like being Jewish is very cool kind of vibes, or like if a celebrity was Jewish, it was like, you know, they're Jewish. Like, you know, it was like very cool.
Like who? Like which celebrity?
Like there was an offensive lineman on the San Francisco 49ers who was Jewish, Harris Barton, and I met him and got an autograph at SportsMart in Emeryville when I was a kid.
That's amazing.
Wow. Hannah, will you talk a little bit about like how you would write in your diary about, your crushes, right, in youth group?
Yeah.
And how you viewed that?
Yeah. Okay. So I wish I should have gotten my diary out. But I guess, okay. To give context, like the terminology is like brothers and sisters in Christ. So, when I would go to the youth group, it was like any of the men were my brothers in Christ, the women were my sisters in Christ. And it gets like a little like incestuous language wise, because some of the teachings about, specifically to women, about like, not just like not dressing in like a revealing or sexual manner, whatever that means, but being like very like in check with yourself. Don't like gaze into someone's eyes too long or whatever, is all about, put into this context of don't make your brother in Christ stumble by lusting after you. And when you really break that down, it's like, don't make your brother lust after you.
Right.
Which, you know, I don't know, didn't seem weird to me at the time, but it's been many years now. And I was going through my diary, like, I don't know, last 6 months or a year. And it's actually the first time I've revisited those diaries because I just couldn't stomach it for so many years. It was like, would crack it open and be like, nope, I'm not going to read this. Too painful. Because there just weren't very many like fun, lighthearted entries. It was a lot of like teen angst channeled into this like deep desire to be like do the right thing and be like pleasing to God, and so much anxiety about, am I disappointing God? So then I like hit puberty and I start having crushes on people, and like, you know, I'm going to youth group and like, it's because I want to like study the Bible, but really I'm like, who's going to be there? And, but then I was channeling all of that into these like really sincere, long journal entries about like my brothers in Christ and how like I wanted to like just encourage them to be better Christians, but then like would kind of veer into like how they were really like sexy or good looking. And then I'm like writing this thing about like how my brother is like handsome. And like, I'm like, if anyone found this, they'd be like, what the hell is going on with this very confused 15-year-old? But yeah, it was like, it's funny to think back about that. Even in my diary, I couldn't just be like honest with myself about that, because God is always watching, you know, God is even reading your diary. But yeah, it was a lot of like tampering down, trying to contain my like sexuality to something that could be like not out of control. And I think that really ties into this book and the culture at large. Like, I mean, the book opens with this like story about this man and woman who are like getting married, like, and I think it's like she's walking down the aisle. And
I think we should actually read this first page and a half.
Yeah,
I think like, is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that this is like a really wild story or parable, I guess, that was dreamt up ostensibly by the author. Mm-hmm. But I think I just want to read that whole first little page and a half.
Do it.
Okay. So, here we go. So this book opens with the following parable. It was finally here, Anna's wedding day, the day she had dreamed about and planned for months. The small, picturesque church was crowded with family and friends. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, and the gentle music of a string quartet filled the air. Anna walked down the aisle toward David. Joy surged within her. This was the moment for which she had waited so long. He gently took her hand, and they turned toward the altar. But as the minister began to lead Anna and David through their vows, the unthinkable happened. A girl stood up in the middle of the congregation, walked quietly toward the altar, and took David's other hand. Another girl approached and stood next to the first, followed by another. Soon, a chain of 6 girls stood beside him as he repeated his vows to Anna. Anna felt her lip begin to quiver as tears welled up in her eyes. "Is this some kind of joke?" she whispered to David. I'm sorry, Anna," he said, staring at the floor. "Who are these girls, David? What's going on?" she gasped. "They're girls from my past," he answered sadly. "Anna, they don't mean anything to me now. But I've given my part of my heart to each of them." "I thought your heart was mine," she said. It is, he pleaded. Everything that's left is yours. A tear rolled down Anna's cheek. Then she woke up. Yeah.
Do you guys want to talk about that, or should we let Justin?
I think we should let Justin talk about when you like first got the book in your hands.
Okay.
Or the other book.
Or the other.
Yeah.
Book.
When Josh Harris came into your.
So yeah, the context here. Say that again, Dan.
The moment that Josh Harris took a part of your heart.
Yeah, I mean, in like preparing for this episode, I realized that I don't think I actually read the book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. I think I read Joshua Harris's other book, which was written after I Kissed Dating Goodbye, called Boy Meets Girl, in which he sort of proves, big air quotes, that his approach to dating, aka courtship, godly courtship, works because he meets this woman, Shannon, who he then marries. And it's like wonderful and blissful and all of that. So, but yeah, but this book was very present for me. I Kissed Dating Goodbye was in conversations. It was in the culture. I don't even know if it was given to me or if I just sort of I absorbed it like through osmosis. So,
you were how old?
I was probably similarly to Hannah. I was probably in high school. And when I read Boy Meets Girl, I think I was probably around 17 at the time. Mm-hmm. So this would have been in like 2008, 2009. Mm-hmm. And the messaging in that book was a lot of the same messaging, right? It was like, it's not enough to save yourself for marriage, meaning don't have sex until you're married. It's like all of the like, I'm worth the wait stuff, but taken to the next level, which is like, you shouldn't even kiss before marriage, like you shouldn't think about your partner sexually or else you're lusting and you're like living not for God, you're living for sin. So I read the book and I just remember like it really did tap into all these fears and all this guilt that I had about that I was like really on the wrong track when it came to just like, the person that I was. Like who I am is not good. Like I am actually inherently very bad. And this sort of like proves all of the fears that I had, like everything that I just felt inside that didn't have a name. Like I know that I'm bad, but I don't really know what to call that. It was sort of like, well, this is why you feel so guilty. It's because like you're living for your own pleasure. You're being selfish, So at that time, I had been dating somebody pretty seriously for a while. I don't know exactly how long at this point, but we were having sex at that time. And I think I found this book, I read this book, and it culminated in me like writing a letter to my boyfriend at the time being like, I think we should stop having sex.
Wow.
like, I just think it's going to be better if we don't do that, which of course like didn't stick, but, it really like
a handwritten letter.
It was a handwritten letter. Yeah. Wow. I don't know how to type very well. So, no, it was handwritten. And I remember the look on his face. His face just kind of like fell as he reads this letter,
This is not the letter he wanted to receive.
Yeah, what did he think? He probably thought the letter was way better.
What'd you say, Dan?
He probably thought the letter was something cool.
Right. It was not the letter he expected or wanted. But yeah, it just led to me. It didn't lead to me stop. It didn't cause me to stop having sex. It just led me to continue having sex, but feel like way worse about it, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you were saying, Hannah, about feeling like the thing about not letting your gaze sit too long with someone, like the idea that, I mean, I didn't have this messaging exactly, so it's really striking me. Just that that there's these people who need this from you out there. Like you're being generous. You're like doing well by them by behaving in these ways. That I just can only imagine as a child, like how much of an impression that would leave.
I mean, yeah, like I think it ties into what you were saying, Justin. I just like identify with so much of that. This feeling of this deep worry that like I am bad. And this type of messaging only just like plays into that fear and worry and like amplifies it. And you are like, we're then sort of forced into this like struggle of trying to celebrate ourselves and experience pleasure, which also constantly in this book, and I think it sounds like in the book you read too, like every other page, basically, pleasure and sin are associated. Your own pleasure is a sin. Your own pleasure is a sin. That's a message that gets like pounded into you over and over and over again, which is just like terrible. You know, then how do you like celebrate experiencing pleasure? And you know, there's one thing which is like maybe some people read it or hear the messaging and then they don't have sex, or they kind of shut themselves off from feeling like a sexual person, which is really sad. But also maybe you do have sex and then you're just ridden with like guilt and feeling terrible about yourself, which also happened to me once I started having sex. I wasn't married. And even at that time, because I was in my like early 20s, and I sort of intellectually was like, I don't think I believe this anymore. I don't think this is healthy. But it was so ingrained that I still struggled with that, with like feeling like, oh, maybe I'm sinning, maybe I'm bad. And then like just compounding, feeling so bad about myself, you know? So I identify with that as well.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I was listening to Joshua Harris being interviewed on this podcast before.
Wait, can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah, please.
I had an idea because I there's so much content of him now.
Yeah.
There's very little content of him from back then.
Oh, yeah.
That you can find.
Interesting.
But I did record on my phone some clips of this series that's on YouTube of him from that time. That's called Searching for Love, just to like kind of set the mood. I thought I could play some of the recording.
I would love that.
Okay, I'm going to play this clip and hopefully it'll sound okay.
The Bible says in Proverbs 19:22, what a man desires is unfailing love. What a man desires is unfailing love. You know, even though those words were written thousands of years ago, they still resonate in our hearts, don't they? That's what people are looking for. They're looking for love that's real, love that's going to last, love that's not going to let them down. We're all searching for true love. The question is, where are we going to find it? It seems these days that people are looking for love in all the wrong places. There are over 3,000 dating services in America today. Every year they rake in over $1 billion. Countless websites are devoted to finding love. See, our problem is that we don't even know what love is these days. And that really complicates things.
You couldn't hear it at the end?
I didn't hear the very end. I don't know what happened.
Oh, weird. Did you hear the end, Justin?
I did.
Okay.
He said, see our problem these days. And I don't understand what
yeah,
accent,
why does he have this accent?
What the accent is. It sounds like a Southern accent. He said, so yeah, problem these days is we don't know what love is anymore. Yeah. That was all he said.
It's like, I mean, the chutzpah, if I may.
Yes, you may.
Of a 21-year-old man saying this thing in this tone is, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just say that, you know, in the book, it's truly wild the way he talks about his disillusionment, because he talks about how in junior high, he starts being interested in girls. Girls are interested in him. He says that he even sneaks out of the house one night for a prearranged meeting with 3 girls. And he says he made out with each of them one after the other, if you can believe that. Yeah. And
now you.
And then when he's 15, he meets Kelly and they date for 2 years and they break up. And then after this breakup, he feels so disillusioned. He says, I felt desperate for an alternative to the cycle of short-term relationships in which I found myself. So I'm like, you're 17. You've had one relationship.
Yeah, your whole life is short term.
Right.
One relationship for 2 years, which is pretty long considering you've only lived for 17 years. But.
Right. Right. So yeah, I mean, there's that. That's pretty laughable. But I mean, there's a lot that's easy to laugh about, but I don't know how to refocus myself because I'm just dizzy with that
I think
content.
Let's talk about the energy of that, because obviously it's so dated sounding.
Sure.
But this is like 1998 probably. I'm guessing this is after the book that this series was filmed. I don't know. But it's like talking about, it's I don't know, maybe in evangelical circles this is still like doesn't feel dated, I don't know, but just like talking about true love, and he spends a lot of time in the series. It's really repetitive. I watch because there's like 5 parts and they're all like 15 minutes or whatever. He spends a lot of time talking about love and all the virtues it has. It's like love is pure, like love is, it doesn't question, like he's describing it, and it's like I'm listening to it, I'm like, okay, like according to who? Like where is this actually coming from, and how do you know these things? Like it feels so intangible.
Sounds like it might be from 1 Corinthians 13. Do you know that?
Oh, maybe.
Love is patient, love is kind.
Yeah. Okay. So it's from the Bible. Okay. That's where it's coming from.
Yeah. That's where it's coming from, Dan. Okay.
But it is very funny to watch this like handsome, like early 20s guy with long hair, like on stage, like speaking really suavely about virtuous, religious, like ideas about love.
Yeah. It's hard for me to watch that. I watched part of his TED talk that he did later where he apologizes. And even that's hard for me to watch because he has this, he talks like a pastor. I mean, probably like what you're talking about. Like it feels like he's up there, he's giving a presentation, and it's very hard for me to listen to.
And he later became a pastor, right? Of a mega church.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I feel like we're going to talk about him and like his arc. I will also say, I wrote this down from the video. He says he describes dating as shallow and empty. And then he says, I've thought about it and I've realized we need God. Like, so it is very much like pastor speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The whole book is sort of built on this dichotomy of like, you're either living for yourself or you're living for God. It's like the two can't really coexist.
Yeah.
And also this false dichotomy of getting versus giving in a romantic relationship. Like you can't possibly be get it. You can't be giving if you're also getting, it's just like, I don't experience that in my relationships. So there's a lot of either or language. He says on page 19 that, the Bible teaches that if we truly trust in Jesus Christ, we die to our old way of living and we can no longer live for ourselves. We now live for God and for the good of others.
Right.
So it's just very confusing because if you're like, so if I care about myself, then I hate other people somehow.
Yeah. Can we talk about the cover?
Oh yeah, Dan, I want you to try to describe the cover for people.
Well, okay. Hannah said this cover's so iconic. So maybe Hannah, you describe like actually what's on the cover.
No, I think Hannah should describe how she feels about the cover, and you should describe like the reality of the cover.
All right, I'm gonna look at it. I'm gonna look at it real quick.
I'll also say a couple of things.
I mean, it's hard for me to see this cover with fresh eyes, because to me, it just, I've seen it so many times. Like my friend worked at a Christian bookstore in high school, and I would go in there and it's just like, there's, what felt like hundreds of copies. Right. And I honestly don't even remember if I used to think it looked cool. I think I did. I think I thought it was cool. And that the person on it was like, I don't know, handsome? I'm not really sure. Dan,
so it's like,
tell us what it actually looks like.
It's like, it looks almost kind of sepia. It's a man. It's like the upper body of a man, and the camera's facing him. He's tipping his hat forward. And how do we describe this hat?
It's like a sort of fedora.
Kind of a fedora.
It's like
an old timey hat.
It's like an old time. It's a Humphrey He looks like Humphrey Bogart.
And you only see his lips and chin under the brim of the hat, and he's like got his hand touching the top. He's like tilting his head forward. I would describe this as like a little, like the way a little boy thinks he looks, like dressing up like some suave man. You know what I mean? Which is probably pretty apt. But he also kind of looks like a villain from like a Coen Brothers movie or something.
Right. Like, it kind of, it's giving like, this tired private investigator is like turning in his, I don't know what a private investigator would turn in, but it's like he's retiring at the ripe age of like 16. It's like, it's a really bonkers cover. I really encourage everyone to look it up if you can.
Right. But it feels very like you're looking at an adult, which makes sense that he would want to portray it that way.
Well, it's funny when you played that clip of him talking back then, his voice sounds like his way of speaking is so affected. Like it really feels like he's putting on like a personality that he thinks is the right personality to sell his message. Totally. Which really lines up with the image on the book, where he is sort of trying to embrace this old-fashioned debonair person who's like almost like a Cary Grant, or I don't know, like where he's like, no, like I know what's happening. Like I don't know, bizarre.
Totally.
He also in that talk. Oh, sorry, Justin.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I feel like that's a big part of his message in the book is like, let's get back to the good old days, right? Of like where it was the front porch instead of the back seat, He's like, I'm trying to look for the quote. I can't find it. So Dan, say what you were going to say.
Well, he tells this story in the talk where he's like, me? He's like, me? I've always been in love with being in love, or like, I've always been in love with love. And he's like, I'm such a romantic. And he tells this story about being a little kid on the playground with this little girl. And you're like, oh God, where's this going? And he's like, and I was pretending to be a superhero, and I was telling her that I would get drained of my superhero powers, and the only thing that would give me my powers back were kisses on the cheek. And so and he was like, it's clear that he thinks this story is crushing. He's like, I kept losing my powers like every 3 seconds, you know? It's like, oh God.
So you could manipulate people from a very young age.
Right.
Right. So you were born for this manipulation job. Okay, cool. But yeah, no, it's like like the old fashionedness of the cover really is so apt for the message that he's touting in the book, which is like yearning for the good old days of like when, quote, and I'm quoting here, a guy and a girl, of course, because in the book it's always a guy and a girl. It's very hetero, obviously. A guy and a girl only became romantically involved if they planned to marry. So that's like the standard that he's setting up is don't expect to get affection from a girl, like you're like undivided affection from a girl, unless you're planning to marry her.
Yeah. He also says in his TED talk, which I think is pretty interesting. We'll talk more about like him now. But he says
wait, before that, I wanted Justin to tell one more anecdote before we move on to the now. Is that okay? Or should we do that now?
No, of course. No,
okay.
Do it.
No, please.
Well, just because like, I'm going to lead up to it. So,
okay.
To me, like one of the trickier like parts of this is that, you know, it's funny, but really it sets people up for like a lot of self-shame, as we've talked about, but also like no education about what actually like a healthy, you know, a sexual experience would be, right? Like just no information, no preparation for that at all. And like, in fact, it really, I think for a lot of people, I've talked with people that have said this, not necessarily this book exactly, but like the culture, because this is really a representation of like the culture. Like I heard that same like story about like walking down the aisle and suddenly there's 6 people or whatever, like in a different way at church, like from youth group, like that story was told over and over again that like, you're going to damage yourself. You're going to spiritually, irreparably damage yourself by having sex or giving your heart to someone before you're supposed to do it for like your spouse who God has chosen for you. And so a lot of people like really to cope would do things like separate themselves, not be in tune with their own bodies, not be in tune with their own sexualities. And then get married. And what happens then? It's like suddenly like that, you're supposed to be in touch with your sexuality and have a healthy relationship and be able to have sex with someone without shame. It just like does not work that way. But there's this whole like myth that's also perpetuated with this whole idea about waiting. And the whole idea is that if you wait long enough, right? And if you meet the person that God wants you to be with, guess what's waiting for you? Mind-blowing banging all the time. And Justin, I want you to tell that story about, because I don't remember that story because I didn't read the other book, but he has a funny anecdote.
Yes. Oh my God. So this is, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through this because it's the most hilarious thing that I've ever heard. But so me as like a 17-year-old, I'm reading Josh Harris's second book, which is called Boy Meets Girl. And in it, he meets Shannon, who is like God made Shannon for me, Josh, not God made Josh for Shannon. Well, maybe it was like, we were made for each other, right? It's still problematic. It's like, anyway. So in this book, there was a couple of things that like, I like carry with me to this day. And I'll share a couple of things because I think now is the time. But he talks about how after he and Shannon are dating for a while, she has this very tearful conversation with him where she reveals that she's not in fact a virgin and doesn't beg for his forgiveness. But in the book, the impression that I was left with was that he gave his forgiveness, because he's such a good guy. And she was damaged. She was damaged goods. She was impure, filthy. But he was like, I understood and we moved past it, kind of thing. So they get married and it's wonderful. They've courted their way into marriage the way that he in I Kiss Dating Goodbye says is the best way to get to know someone. Courtship being defined as you get the family involved, the end goal is marriage. And there's no lusting, there's no kissing, there's no touching, blah, blah, blah. So we could probably cut out everything I just said. The main juice is that he talks about their honeymoon in the book. He's like, these modern secular couples, I feel so sad for them. Like, I feel so bad for them because they, on their honeymoons, they have to schedule all these activities. They have to schedule scuba diving. They have to schedule paddle boarding. They have to do rock climbing. But, me and Shannon, like, we didn't leave our hotel room the whole time because he doesn't say this because he says, but he means like we were fucking the whole time because it was just so good. The sex was so good and we were so into it. So that really stuck with me because I was like, I don't want to have to schedule all these activities like because I'm
too?
bored of sex.
Yeah. I don't even like rock climbing.
Yeah. I was like, well, I better like save myself so that there's something to look forward to,
It's such an interesting image because and it's funny that it's like the scheduling he's focused on. You know what I mean? But it's like these people like really depressed, like rock climbers.
Right. We have nothing else to do but rock climb.
We're just filling time
and play pickleball.
Too bad we had all that sex before we were married. Damn.
Yeah. Now there's no sex that's left to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a great
that's
book.
Amazing. He said in the TED Talk that at age 20, he knelt in his parents' living room in Oregon and prayed to God. And he said, God, let me write a book that will change the world.
Oops. Yeah. You have to really qualify when you say change, you have to say like for the better.
Well, I feel like that, indicates what it is, right? It's like he packaged these ideas that there was a huge audience for, and him being like a young man saying these things left a big impression on people, or like really was able to deliver the message in a powerful way.
Yeah. So he originally, this book was actually sort of a talk or sort of a sermon that he gave to the congregation of, I think the church that he was part of or some church. And I can't actually, now I'm sort of confused on the details, but he basically gave a talk, I think first about how great homeschooling was for him. And it's like, isn't it so great that my parents homeschooled me, and look at me, I'm this, shining example of what homeschooling your children can do in raising a godly child. And he gave that talk to a congregation and got a standing ovation from everyone there. And now with all of his years of reflection and hindsight, he sees that those parents were giving him a standing ovation because they were like, that's what I wish my kid was like, seeing him. And then he also then, as he's developing these ideas about dating, then he wrote this article for Christian magazine, or like a homeschooling magazine that he started, that then got him this book contract. Okay. So
yeah.
And I mean, as I list, I will get into sort of how he did this 180, but he has this reflection about why this book was so successful And he says that, quote, if you can call people to a higher standard and tap into that fear that I'm not trying hard enough, that I'm not really loving God enough, I'm not sacrificing enough, there's always going to be another person coming along with a book or a conference to sell that is going to tap into that and say, you're right, you're not doing enough. Let me show you how you can do more. So it's this sort of like spiritual or religious perfectionism that it's like, you think you're being pure, but let's move the needle a little further. And now the standard is up here. And are you living up to that? And that really is going to like sell and make people with a message a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's our show. Thanks for joining us. Our music is by Nightlight. We self-produce this podcast, so please subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps.